I'd like to talk today about some of the misconceptions around creative research methods. You probably know that creative research methods is one of my specialist areas. Indeed, I've written a book on the subject. Happen to have a handy copy here, although this is the first edition. By the time you see this, probably the second edition will be available. And I've identified in the years I've been working around this topic 8 misconceptions that are commonly held and are wrong. So I'm going to tell you what they are and explain why they're wrong. The first misconception is that creative equals qualitative, that creative research methods are only for qualitative researchers. This is so wrong it couldn't be wronger. There are some quantitative and STEM researchers who are using some incredibly creative methods to achieve their research ends at all stages of the research process. I don't mean STEM researchers are using creative methods at every single stage, but that there are examples of creative methods being used at each stage by quantitative and STEM researchers. If you think about it, writing is a key one because writing is a research method. People often don't recognise it as such, but it is, and every researcher has to engage with writing, every researcher has to write. However quantitative your work is, you can't just present lists of tables or sheets of equations without some narrative, and that narrative has to be written of words, and that's a qualitative skill. And it's a creative skill. You might think that non-fiction academic writing isn't creative. This is another misconception, not about creative research methods as such, but I will argue that all writing is creative because, however factual, you're putting words together to create sentences, to create paragraphs that nobody ever created before, hence creative. That's my argument. So some examples, I'll give you just perhaps one really lovely example of a creative method that was used in a quantitative research setting. It's to do with hyperbolic geometry. The scientist concerned was called Diana Taimina. She came from Latvia, but she was working in California, I think at the University of Berkeley. And she was studying hyperbolic geometry, which is the geometry of frilly things like lettuces or seaweed, with those sort of frilly edges. And there was a problem in the field of hyperbolic, of geometry as a whole, that nobody had ever been able to model hyperbolic geometry for centuries, literally centuries. This had been a problem in the field. And she was sitting at home one night, musing over this problem while occupying her hands with some crochet, when a light bulb moment struck and she realised that she could model hyperbolic geometry using crochet. And indeed, she now crochets entire coral reefs. So there you are, that's a lovely example of a creative method in quantitative research. It's now being spun out into architecture and other fields also. You can look it up on the internet. She has a TED talk. It's very interesting. So that's misconception number 1. The second one is that creative research equals arts-based research, which it doesn't. Arts-based research is a subset of creative research methods. It's an important, large subset, but it's not the whole thing. Creative research methods also encompasses embodied research, mixed methods research, research using technology, and transformative research frameworks such as participatory research, feminist research, activist research, and so on. Another misconception is that arts-based research equals visual arts or visual methods. Again, not so. Visual methods are a big important subset of arts-based research, but arts-based research also includes performative research. It includes research around sound, soundscapes, sensory methods, which overlaps with embodied research, because of course none of these things are mutually exclusive. It includes video and photography, which then overlaps with technology. So arts-based research is a big field, and visual methods is just one part of that. Then there's a fourth misconception that creative equals innovative, that they are essentially one and the same. This is arguable, but I don't think it's the whole story. I think it's possible to be very creative with established methods. For example, some researchers called Belzile and Oberg worked with focus groups. Now, focus groups have been around since the 1940s, so they're hardly innovative in these days of the 21st century. But what Belzile and Oberg did that nobody had done before, as far as we know, is that when they were analysing focus group data, they didn't only look at what was said, they looked at the interactions between people in the group. The minute you hear that, you think, oh, that's so obvious. But it hadn't been done. People had treated focus group data just like interview data, just like a block of text to pull meaning from. But there was this whole other dimension, and that was a creative step that they took there. They did some creative thinking, those researchers, to get to that point. It was an innovation of sorts, but it was like a little innovation among a very conventional method. And it was creative, so I'm not sure creative and innovative are entirely the same. A fifth misconception is that creative methods mean that research is not rigorous. It's about fluffy, playful, girly stuff. It's about, doing a bit of art and a bit of painting and going, oh yes, that's lovely, dear. In fact, the thing about creative research is that it doesn't change the principles of good research practice. Using creative methods, you still need to be systematic, you still need to be thorough, you still need to have a good plan and a good design and then work through that. You still need to be highly ethical. All of these things apply in exactly the same way. And creative research can be hugely rigorous, or not very, in the same way as conventional research can be hugely rigorous, or not very. Sixth misconception is that only creative people can use creative methods. This is an implication that only some people are creative. This is something else I would dispute. I think everyone is creative or has creative potential. And I could demonstrate that to you if we were in the same room. It's a little harder on YouTube. But when I'm doing keynote speeches, I give people pipe cleaners and I ask them to make models, and nobody ever says I can't do it. In fact, people have a lot of fun with it. And then they talk about their models and we all have a discussion and a good laugh, and we learn from it too. It's a creative process. So anyone can use creative methods. You don't have to be creative. But equally, if you want to use a creative method, you don't have to go way out of your comfort zone. Maybe a step outside your comfort zone would be good. That's often where magic happens. But if a method feels way beyond you, even if you like the idea, don't try to use it. You're just setting yourself up for a really hard time. There's plenty of other methods to choose from. A seventh misconception is that creative methods are only for gathering data. A lot of people think of creative methods in this context. Think, oh yes, we'll use creative methods. We'll use arts. We'll do collage. We'll do modelling. We'll do animation. We'll do all these sorts of wonderful and wacky things. And that can be enormous fun for researchers and for participants. And why shouldn't research not be fun? That's just great. But in fact, you can use creative methods at any stage. You can design your research creatively. You can set it in context creatively. There are some really creative approaches to literature reviews, to even thinking about what literature is. You can analyse data creatively using different methods, using different approaches, using arts-based methods, using more than one method to see if they tell you the same story or different, using theoretical lenses in different ways. And of course, you can report on research and present your findings and disseminate your findings in all sorts of creative ways. But having said that, that leads me to the final misconception, which is that everything must be creative, that it's not creative research unless it's creative through and through. I don't buy that for a minute. I think it could just be a little bit creative in one dimension, and it would still count as creative in that dimension and in that sense. I run a course on creative methods for the Social Research Association, which is an open course. And so that means a lot of different people come on that course, and sometimes government researchers come. And government researchers often want to use creative methods, but kind of have a hard time because their bosses tend to be a bit worried about it. And what I advise them is to use creative methods of disseminating their research to begin with, because they need to engage the public, and that's much more easily done through a creative approach than through giving people a massive block of text or a tedious PowerPoint presentation full of facts and figures. And they see the point of that. And I think if you start with dissemination, then you can work backwards through the research process to bring creativity in that way. But don't feel under pressure to be super creative. Sometimes a conventional method is exactly what you need. If your research question even has a good chance of being answered well using interviews, use interviews. Interviews are a great method. Absolutely nothing wrong with them. You might want to enhance them in a slightly creative way by bringing in artifacts or photos if you want to, but you don't have to. Researchers say you get richer data if you do that often, but it's not guaranteed. So think about what your research needs. Don't let the method lead the research. Figure out what the project is you want to do, what your research questions are, and then look at which methods are most likely to help you answer that question, solve that problem. Whether they're creative or whether they're conventional isn't really important. The question needs to lead the methods and not the other way around.